The Christmas Mystery by Justine Gardner. December 1st. Dusk was falling. The lights were on in the Christmas streets, and thick snowflakes danced between the lamps. The streets were crowded with people. Among all these busy people were Papa and Joachim. They had gone into town to buy an Advent calendar, and it was their last chance because tomorrow would be December 1st. They were sold out at the newsstand and in the big bookstore in the market square. Joachim tugged Papa's hand hard and pointed to a tiny shop window. An Advent calendar in bright colors was leaning against a pile of books. "There," he said. Papa turned back. "Saved!" They went into the tiny bookshop. Joachim thought it looked a little old and worn out. There were shelves from floor to ceiling all along the walls, and all the shelves of books were tightly packed. A large pile of Advent calendars lay on the counter. There were two kinds, one with a picture of Santa Claus with a red reindeer and sleigh, and the other had a picture of a barn with a tiny Christmas elf. Whoops, that's not right. Yes, it is. Or niece eating porridge out of a big bowl. Papa held up the two calendars. "There are chocolates behind the doors in this one, but of course your dentist would not like that. The other has small plastic figures." Joachim examined the two calendars. "It was different when I was a boy." "What do you mean?" "Then there were only a tiny picture behind each door, one for each day. We were so excited every morning. We used to try to guess what the picture would be. Then we opened the door. Well, we opened it, you see. It was like opening a door into a different world." "There's an Advent calendar over there," Joachim noticed. He ran over and held it up to show Papa. It had a picture of Joseph and Mary bending over the baby Jesus in the manger. The three wise men from the east were kneeling in the background. Outside the stable were the shepherds with their sheep, and angels floated down from the sky. One of them was blowing a trumpet. The calendar's colors were faded, as if it had been lying in the sun all summer, but the picture was so beautiful that Joachim felt a little sorry for it. "I want this one." "You know, I don't think this one's for sale. I think it must be very old, maybe as old as I am. None of the doors are open, but it's only here for decoration." Joachim hadn't taken his eyes off the calendar. "I want it," he repeated. "I want the one that's like none of the others." The bookseller appeared with white hair, and he came over to them. He looked surprised. "Beautiful, genuine, yes, original. It looks homemade. He wants to buy it. I'm trying to explain that it's not for sale." "Did you find it here?" said the bookseller. "I haven't seen that many like this for years." It was in front of all the books. "Oh, old John must be up to his old tricks again." "John?" "Yes, he's a strange character. He sells roses in the market. Sometimes he comes in and asks for a glass of water. In summer, when it's hot, he'll pour the last drops over his head before he goes out again. He's poured a few drops over me a couple of times, too. To thank me for the water, he sometimes leaves 1 or 2 roses on the counter. Or he'll put an old book on the bookshelf. Once he put a photograph of a young woman in the window. It was from a country far away. Maybe that's where he comes from. Elizabeth, it said on the photo. And now he's left an Advent calendar. Yes, apparently. There's something written on it. Magic Advent calendar, price 75 or. In that case, it must be very old. The man laughed. "I think you should have it for nothing. You'll see old John had you in mind." "Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you," said Joachim. Papa shook the bookseller's hand and followed Joachim out to the sidewalk. "I'll open the first door tomorrow," said Joachim. Joachim woke up many times that night. He thought about the white-haired bookseller and about John with his roses in the market. He went to the bathroom and drank water from the tap. He remembered that John had poured water over his head. Most of all, he thought about the magic Advent calendar, which was as old as Papa, and yet nobody had opened any of the doors. Before he went to bed, he found all the doors from 1 to 24. The 24th was, of course, Christmas Eve, and that door was 4 times bigger than the others. It covered almost the entire manger in the stable. Where had the Advent calendar been for 40 years? And what would happen when he opened the first door? When he woke up again, it was 7 o'clock. He reached up and tried to open the first door, but his fingers were so impatient it was difficult. At last he managed to loosen a tiny corner, and the door slowly opened. Joachim gazed at the picture of a toy store. Among all the toys and the people were a little lamb and a small girl. But he couldn't look more closely at the picture because just as he opened the door, something fell out onto his bed. He picked it up. It was a thin sheet of paper, folded over and over again. He smoothed it out and saw that there was writing on both sides, and he sat down and began to read. The little lamb. "Elizabeth," her mother called after her. "Come back, Elizabeth." Elizabeth Hansen had been standing staring at a big pile of teddy bears and stuffed animals while her mother was buying Christmas presents for the cousins who lived in Toten. All of a sudden, a little lamb popped out of the pile, jumped to the floor, and looked around. It had a bell around its neck, and the bell started to jingle in competition with the cash registers. How could a toy suddenly come to life? She was so surprised she started to chase the lamb. "Little lamb, little lamb." The lamb was now on the escalator, which led to the floor below. The escalator moved quickly, and the lamb leaped even faster, so that Elizabeth had to run faster than the escalator and the lamb together to catch up with it. "Come back, Elizabeth," repeated her mother severely. But Elizabeth had already jumped on the escalator. She could see the lamb running across the ground floor where they sold underwear and tires. As soon as she had solid ground under her feet again, she went the same way as the lamb. It had bounded out to the street where the snowflakes were dancing, amid all the strings of Christmas lights hanging from the street lights. Elizabeth knocked over a display of winter gloves and followed it. The street was so noisy that she could only hear the bell jingling over the church street. But Elizabeth did not give up. She was determined to pat the lamb's soft fleece. "Little lamb, little lamb." The lamb dashed across the road against the light. Perhaps it thought that the red man on the traffic light meant go, and the green man meant stop. Elizabeth thought she'd heard that sheep were colorblind. At any rate, the lamb didn't stop at the red man on the light, so Elizabeth couldn't stop either. She was going to catch that lamb, even if she had to follow it to the ends of the earth. The cars honked their horns, and a motorcycle had to swerve onto the sidewalk to avoid colliding with Elizabeth or the little lamb. The people doing their Christmas shopping stared. They didn't often see a little girl running across Church Street against the light to catch a lamb. In any case, it was unusual to be running after a lamb in the middle of winter. As they ran, Elizabeth heard the church clock strike 3. She noticed it especially because she knew she had come to town at 5 o'clock on the 5 o'clock bus. Perhaps the clock hands had become so tired of going in the same direction year after year that they'd suddenly begun to go in the opposite way instead. Elizabeth thought that clocks, too, might get bored with doing the same thing all the time. But there was something else. When Elizabeth had gone into the department store, it had been almost completely dark outside. Now it was light again, and it was odd, because there was no night in between. As soon as the lamb had a chance, it turned onto a road leading out of town and trotted on towards some woods. It leaped onto a path between tall pine trees. Now it had to slow down a little because the path was covered with snow that had begun falling during the past few days. Elizabeth went after it. It was difficult for her to run, too, but the lamb had 4 legs that were dragging in the snow, while she had only 2. Perhaps that would help her to catch up. Her mother's cries were long since drowned out by the noise in the street. Soon she couldn't even hear street sounds, but something was still ringing in her ears. "Should we buy this one or that one? What do you think, Elizabeth?" Perhaps the lamb had come to life to run away from the store because it could not bear to listen to all the cash registers and all the talk about buying and selling. And perhaps that was why Elizabeth was following it. She was never very fond of shopping. Joachim looked up from the thin sheet of paper. He was amazed by what he'd read. He had always liked secrets. Now he remembered the little box with the key in it, the one Grandma had bought him in Poland. Mama and Papa had made him the solemn promise that they would never look for the key and open the box when he was asleep or at school. It would be as bad as opening someone else's letters, they had said. Until today, Joachim hadn't had any real secrets to hide in the box. But now he put the paper from the advent calendar, locked it up, and hid the key under his pillow. When Mama and Papa woke up and came to look at the advent calendar too, they would see only the picture of the lamb in the department store. "Do you remember," asked Mamma, looking up at Papa, "it was just like that when we were small." "Then we used our imagination," said Papa, "and made up a story about each little picture. It was even better than plastic figures that end up being swallowed by an angry vacuum cleaner." Joaquin was laughing inside, only he knew that there had been a mysterious piece of paper. He pointed to the picture of the lamb. "The lamb has decided to run away from the shop because it can't bear listening to all the cash registers and the talk about buying and selling. But there's a little girl called Elizabeth in the shop, and she runs after the lamb because she wants to pat its soft fleece. See what I mean?" Papa said. "What does the boy want with plastic figures?" For the rest of the day Joaquin wondered whether Elizabeth would catch up with the lamb so she could pat its fleece. Would he find out tomorrow? Then surely there would be another piece of paper. And so tomorrow we will read December 2nd from The Christmas Mystery. I love you, Laura. Good night.